Hey guys, welcome back to part 4 of how to build a Kickstarter clone over YouTube. Alright, so we've done pretty well so far. Just one little thing before we continue on down this path, and that's I really just want to make this current API setup that we have really robust and really production standard and very friendly not only for ourselves to develop in, but potentially for our teammates, not only to make them more comfortable with the code and enforce some sort of standards, but make sure that when they make changes to this code, they're also following a defined standard, and that will help make our lives easier as well. So it's not necessary, particularly if you're only learning TypeScript or you just want to like create the application itself, but if you're trying to enforce or even develop some good practices and some good standards, or you sort of think it'll be helpful for your teammates or anything like that, this is definitely the episode for you. So we're going to go through and install a linter, and our linter is just going to go through all our files and make sure that we're doing things in a consistent standard, and we're going to set those rules. A lot of those rules are just going to be a lot of those rules are just going to be predefined by sort of industry standard best practices, or other sort of a couple of them will be just sort of standards that you can override, but most people just use the default settings, or they choose a particular style guide and they just follow that guide. It doesn't really matter what the standards are, but the end goal is to make sure two things. One, that anyone can come on board and just like know one set of rules and standards and how everything is written and approached, so it's sort of really easy to onboard someone. And two is so that the whole code base itself looks like it's written by one person, no matter if one person wrote it, 10 people wrote it, or 100 people wrote it. It all sort of looks the same way. It's all written the same way. And that means that not only can you help onboard a new person, but if you yourself can easily pick up and go into any piece of the code, even if you wrote it or you didn't write it. If you wrote it a year ago and forgot all about it, and just pick up and go, okay, cool, this is what's happening. So we can do that with ESlint. We can also do that with comments, which is why we've been leaving our comments in our controllers. And if you just remember, so the routes, or I don't know, where did we leave the controllers in? Services. They are in the controllers, yeah. These sort of controllers, just so that we know exactly what's going on at each level of the application. We can't really enforce comments, but you can enforce linting, and so linting will pick up, for example, are we consistently across everything? Are we consistently using double quotes or single quotes? Are we having the semicolons at the end of every line? Are we using anonymous functions, so like this, for example? Or are we using predefined functions, or whatever it's called, like this? So there's nothing syntactically wrong with doing one or the other. It's again a preference thing, but the end goal is to make sure that everything looks and be a consistent feel. So we go through and force this sort of stuff the whole time. We're also going to be running the pre-commit checking with Husky, which is going to be a thing that runs whenever we want to make a commit to GitHub, and it's going to run that ESlint and make sure that our code is up to standards, and if it's not, it will not let us commit. So you cannot commit bad code, or at least code that's not up to the standards of what you define in the ESlinter. And then just to make our lives easier for our teammates, we're going to export the Postman collection, and it might also make your life a little bit easier if you haven't been following along, but just want to pick up now. Alright, and that's the overview. So I've also done one extra thing and just create an env sample file. And this env sample file is literally pretty much a clone of this env file, and it's just there to help you, again, onboard a new teammate and just go, this is sort of all the variables you need to know, defined in one location. Cool, so let's run our first command, and it's going to be Npm Init at ESlint config, and it's going to ask us a bunch of questions. Cool, so how would you like to use it? We want to enforce code style. We're actually using at the moment both of these. So if I go have a look at the controllers, we're using module exports to do a bunch of stuff, but we're also using imports. Interesting. And then we're importing export. So I'm actually going to go with import export. We're not using a framework. We're definitely using TypeScript it is an API, so we are using it in Node, and I kind of want to answer questions. I want to use a JSON format. That's sort of the standard. We are currently using spaces, single quotes. I want a Windows, but I usually go on a Mac, so semicolons, yes. Alright, let's install all the recommended plugins based on those answers that we provided. We're using npm, and off it goes. And that creates this file for us, and inside this file is a bunch of things that we answered and we sort of told it that we want it to be. So if you look at the rules, we told it that we want indents to be 4 and errors, it could be like error or a warning or just ignore it, but we're saying it's going to be an error, there's not indentation of 4. Same for quotes, same for semicolons, same for everything. And this is saying we're going to use ESlint, and ESlint is just going to extend the recommended settings and then the Typescript recommended settings. We're also going to change this up a bit. So we're going to be using Prettier. So Prettier is an extension. If you haven't already seen it, just bear with me. It'll be really brief. Just go to this extensions market, install Prettier, and Prettier is what's working in the background for if we go and do like a nice line here. And then I save it, it sort of moves it down to a new line for me for easy readability. And if I do double quotes, it's going to instantly transform into single quotes for me on save. That's just something that runs in the background for me. So we also just want to tell ESlint about that. So when we go ESlint, I'm actually going to go let's go, I think it's plugin Prettier / recommended. Actually, before we do that, that might break it. So before we do that, let's just make sure it works. And inside, to make sure it works, we're going to add a custom script. So when we run lint, what we want to do is, when we run npm run lint, we want ESlint to run. It's going to look for any file with the extension of JS or any file with extension of TS, and it's going to be within the current directory or any subdirectories, which is just what that dot signifies. And we're also going to create the same thing, but if we run .fix, so if we run npm run lint-fix, we're going to run the same command, but we're going to run the --fix flag at the end of it, and that's going to go through and just fix all the changes they can, so like the semicolons and the single quotes and double quotes if Prettier hasn't already done it. So it's a little bit of time there. It won't do a bunch of the complicated ones or the ones with questions for us. So let's see it. npm run lint. Cool. So we have 21 problems, 20 errors, 1 warnings, and just a bunch of, we're using requires everywhere. We told it import. And line 4, unnecessary escape. Oh, it doesn't like the way I've done this. Okay. Interesting. Sanitize users never reassign, use constant instead. I mean, it makes total sense, and it's just the best practice, but it's something that we didn't pick up before because we never had this sort of Lintel rules going for it. And then what's this? Missing a semicolon. So that sort of stuff, if I run lint fix, just gets fixed for me. Cool. So now there's only 11 problems. One other extension is the Lintel. So you add Lintel and you just install it, and then inside of your project files, you go open the command palette and you go this little thing. So we run a command, or we run around the Lintel command. If you don't have it up the top, you search for it, and over time it will just pick up which ones you use the most. So Lintel commands. And then we can go, okay, let's look at the active rules, and this is a list of all the active rules. This is the module it came from, ESlint or Typescript. And then if we look at our ESlint, it's because we've got ESlint default and then the Typescript plugin, which is why it's picking up 2 sort of sets of rules. and goes through and you go, okay, requires supercalls and constructors, off, we no longer require it. Or instead of making an error, make it just a warning message instead. And sort of configure and change your rules here. And then also, if you don't know what this means, you can just open the documentation really easily and just have a read of what the rules are for each thing. It's particularly helpful in cases you've never used this sort of stuff before and you go, you're like, unnecessary escape character, no useless escape. You're like, what does that even mean? Let's have a look at the rules and documentation, and it sort of goes you through, and you're like, okay, I understand what it's asking me for. Let's make an educated decision and either configure the rules directly in here or in Lintel or anywhere and just like customize the rules yourself or change it as to the recommended rules. So now I just said that, we're going to potentially break this because we're also going to run the plugin of Prettier / recommended because Prettier is going to do a lot of heavy lifting for us and we want the ESlint to know about Prettier. It's also going to be a plugin. We're going to be plugging to the bottom and we're going to have Prettier as the last thing here. And this way Prettier is the last rule and the last plugin is the last thing ever that gets called when we sort of initialize this. So it goes through, we're like, cool, we extend these rules, cool, these rules overwrite these rules because it's later down the tree, and then Prettier is the last thing, so Prettier rules will overwrite everything else. And that's good because we make changes, say we make changes from 4 spaces to 2 spaces, we only have to change inside the Prettier files, and then it'll just enforce the Prettier rule settings everywhere else. So we also have to create a .prettier rc file, and inside of .prettier rc, let's have some options. Let's go tab width of 4. In case we ever switch to tabs, we're also going to have use tabs, so to be false because we're actually using spaces. But if we were to use tabs, let's go with 4 spaces per to a tab. So it sort of wouldn't overwrite what we're doing currently. So just a failback method. We're going to have semicolons to be true, single quote to be true, end of line is going to be just auto, and print width to be 80, and that's just how long a single line of your file can get before it'll just automatically do stuff like this and make it more readable over more lines. Particularly if, like we had, so we have users here, but if we had users and I don't know, names and configs and is true booleans, and I don't know, we were having a bunch of different arguments when we call this, and then all those arguments could be a really long one line, but instead at 80 also chop it off and break it up into those multiple lines we were just playing out before. Alright, so now we've done that, let's see if we break it, if we run Lint again. Yes we did. Let's install them because we're referencing it, but we have not installed it, so let's run it. Cool, run Lint again. Couldn't find the config Prettier to extend from. I mean, it's right there, so why couldn't you find it? I believe it is. Let's look at our package.json real quick. Yeah, let's go install Prettier as a dev dependency. Will that fix it? No. Npm install. Not Prettier. Let's make the dev dependency argument first. Npm install. That's also the same as --save dev, but it's just quicker to do the -D npm install as a dev. We want to install ESlint plugin Prettier, because in ESlint that's what we're ESlint plugin Prettier. That's what we're referencing. And let's quickly have a play around of this. I think so I'll say ESlint config Prettier. There's two. Plugin. Alright, let's install the config and run the lint. Cool, that worked. Okay, now the lint knows about Prettier. There are 11 problems, 1 warning. Alright, let's get going and sort of fix this. They are all next 5 I never use, so we can get rid of that then. Still having problems. Next function. We don't need to import it, we're not using it. Now let's get 10 problems. Cool. Alright, let's go. Require.env. Instead of that, let's import .env from .env, and then we want .env.config. Requires some, I believe, yes, I do hope. Anyway, that's just part of this. So if I reopen it and it thinks about it, we run lint. Yeah, cool. So one of those things that I found happening quite consistently, for me anyway, was whenever I did like this lint and then I did a bunch of rules on top of it and then I started fixing it, VS Code had a minor freak out. And see how, like, I don't know if I can recall, but I believe before we closed it, the red line sort of ended like halfway through the from. It was sort of weird, and it sort of referenced a rule that we just fixed. So that's why I just like gave it a refresh, closed VS Code and restarted it, and it just went away, and now it's doing this thing properly. Let's move on. Cool. So we don't need project routes there. All right, let's go. I'm essentially just going to quickly rearrange this. So we have the external files up here and then our own files here. That can go there, and then we can go import project routes from /routes project routes, and then project routes. Project routes is having an error because we're not exporting by default because we're importing a module still, but that's fine. We'll fix that later. And then we go user routes. Now 7 problems. Cool. Let's fix this first of all. So we want to import project controller from /controller/project controller. Actually, no, we actually want to import this from there. And all of those are not defined, but that's fine. So we go inside of here. We can export. Not sure what rule that is exactly. I think that should be the line break. Oh, we'll see. Yeah, extra spaces, but it's not enforcing me to do that. I think that's just the line break because that line is too long, which is that 80 character rule I referenced before. Alright, moving on. yeah, when I press save, it just automatically does it in a new line. That's definitely the line break. Cool. Coming up. We want to export. We want to export. Export. We don't want to do module exports anymore because we're doing import exports. And we're going to import async handler from express async handler, and then cool. Okay then, project routes. We're going to export default project routes, and we're going to change router to project routes. Export default project routes. Save, and yeah, it was just a line break and semicolons. Save, and it does it for us because of Prettier. Let's go to user routes. Alright, reset this. We're going to import it from this place, and then delete that, and go user routes. Export default user routes, and then inside of here is going to be the same as the project controller. We need to do that real quick. Import from, and then export, and line break. Cool. Export, 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 export. Delete that. Cool. Alright. Wonder how many that fixed. Down to 3. Excellent. That's this. And if I... Interesting. Alright, we'll do that in a sec. Let's firstly just make sure that that's up there, that's down here. Cool. Probably, yeah, we'll deal with that in a sec. Unnecessary escape character, because he doesn't like the regex expression. I do think that's correct, though. Yeah. Escaping non-special characters and strings, blah blah, does not extract as demonstrated. So, yeah, that makes sense. So if you do that by default, it doesn't actually make a difference. Therefore, you shouldn't do it because you might expect that it does make a difference when it doesn't. Therefore, you just shouldn't do it in the first place. However, it does make a difference with regex. So if I just look up ESlint to make sure it's escape regex. Yeah, just regex. How to disable ESlint. Okay, so that's just... Okay, cool. So this is one of those niche scenarios where it's a valid rule, and I agree with the rule itself, because if we were to do like username is required, that extra space I do there isn't going to show up in the required log. It's actually irrelevant, unnecessary, irrelevant, doesn't do anything. So it makes sense to get rid of it. However, it does do something for regex. So I'm going to at least I'm like 90% sure it does something for regex. So I'm going to disable it just for this line, and it's ESlint disable for the next line. This rule only, not all rules, only that rule. So if I get rid of that, this rule will still show up, but only that rule will not show up. cool. Alright, looks like we're good, except for where we're not. Alright, let's have a look at this middleware, shall we? It's complaining about a bunch of things. What's actually going on though? Export cons protect async handler. Async blah blah blah. Argument of type request get user info. Request blah. Response is not assignable to response and next to void. Arguments of parameters request and request. Okay, cool. So the request get user argument and the request this one are incompatible. User is missing in request parameters dictionary. Any but required. I believe that will solve it. Yeah. Yeah, so the user property that we've established, and it's about this request because to get all this nonsense that we're reading through, type parameter request and request incompatible. That's how we knew it was about requests, and therefore we knew it was about this. Saying user is missing inside of this, and if you don't know or recognize what this is, it's usually the default one, aka it's this request thing that extends from by default. But it's required in type of this. So because it's required in this, this is actually an extension of requests, and inside of requests you don't have to have this user, but you can have a bunch of anythings, and because of that you can't make it mandatory, and that solves it. Okay, cool. That is a bunch of different changes. Let's just go through and make sure that none of them are erroring out when I click into them. Sometimes it will think that there's nothing wrong with it, but if I go into the file, it might like throw a red error at me. Okay, looks pretty good to me. Let's now look at, before we commit, let's do npx Husky init. Need to install Husky. Let's go. Alright, and then we have to run npm install. Come on, where are you? That didn't work as intended. Interesting. npx Husky init. And then current directory. Okay, let's run before we run into more errors trying to do this, let's just run the commits and say that we have ESlint and Prettier RC setup, and push it. Cool. Alright, I'll be right back with an answer as to why Husky doesn't work. Alright, and looks like that was the silliest error in the history of errors. When we run npx Husky init that we originally ran, is husky-init. And now we're doing this. And now it makes a .husky file. So Husky is going to be basically a pre-commit hook. So what it means is if I was to run git add, git commit commands, it's going to look inside of this pre-commit and run this command. And this command, npm test, so we don't have set up, npm test will just run as if you type npm test in the terminal. And again, that's going to look at your package JSON for your scripts and go the npm test. So instead of running npm test, we want to run npm run lint. So we'll take the lint and go npm lint. And now when we go, let's say we want to add stuff, and you go git commit -m test commit. Sorry, npm run lint, git commit test lint. Cool. So you notice for the first time it ran npm, and it's like, well, I don't actually know what the lint command meant because you had to type in the run lint, and then but it was running npm, and then npm had to exit, and then Husky exited with the error code. You didn't actually continue, and that means that we actually didn't git commit there because it was the commit running was conditional on Husky going okay, proceed to the git run. It's a bit like in our backend with the controllers when we want, sorry, not controllers, the routes. When we want to protect something, it runs this sort of function first and then calls the next function along if there's no errors. But if there are errors, so again, when we run this protect function, we're looking to see if there's headers, authorization, etc., and the bearer token and interpret that the user's allowed to do whatever they want to do. And then if they are allowed, call whatever the next function is. You don't care what the next function is. So Husky is set up to run this command, and then if there's no errors and everything proceeds perfectly, continue what you were doing, which is the commit. So when we ran it, it also ran with the properly, with npm run lint, it ran the actual ESlint files. Cool. So now, if we wanted to, let's have a look at, let's go into our controller and we'll get rid of that. There you go, git commit. Pre-commit hook failed. Nothing's added to git. Nothing's added to git committed. Because the commit itself failed, because the linter failed. So I actually want to run lint fix. Because if it's a simple error like we just did with a semicolon, we can just change it for us. And I'm okay with that. And now we go to VS Code, and they're at least committed. Git add, git commit, and there we go again. Let's just do that one more time. Yeah, so it's not actually that because, maybe I'll change it back. So when it's running this lint fix, you're adding all the files to be committed, and then you're running lint fix, and if lint fix changes one of those files, because it was changed since the last time you ran a git add, it actually gets removed from the git commit. So you have to rerun the commit with the new file, aka the new changes, the new auto changes they added. So instead I'm just going to remove the fix, because if it adds stuff automatically, like it adds this line break from it automatically, and then it passes to the linter, but then it doesn't get added to the git commit, and I think it has been committed, it'll just get really awkward really fast. So I'm just going to do that instead. And now if it won't, yep, now it won't pass, but I have to run npm run lint fix myself before I run it. And maybe we can add it extra in here. Npm run lint dash fix. Maybe we can do git add all again, and then npm run lint. Okay, let's try that out. If I make an error, then I run the lint fix. And, but yeah, that works well. It's added to the commit file. No, it doesn't, because it's still blue. He hasn't added it properly. Alright, well, it's worth a try. Cool. So that's the Husky as just running and enforcing the ESlinter before you are allowed to make any changes. Let's also have a look at the Postman now. So if you have a teammate that comes along, they won't necessarily be added to a workspace, because you can just invite teammates to a workspace and sort of expand all over the project. But maybe you have a workspace and you're doing a bunch of different things within that workspace. Maybe I generally have like a workspace for work, and it'll be like a work, and then we might have 5 internal microservices and like 2 applications and I don't know, a bunch of different random stuff, and each has its own folders and routes, so you sort of nest them down. But someone might come, there might be an intern that might be there for a day, that might just be learning, there might be a new teammate, but they don't want to get bogged down with everything that you'll have access to, they only want something. You can add them to like the whole workspace, but that also runs into a cost of, as I said, like they might get bogged down with the directory file. You can deal with that, but if you want to add it to a workspace, I do believe there's a cost to do that. At least my work doesn't want to sort of pay that, so we all have our own sort of collections. So instead, you just go up to whatever sort of file or level that you want. So we're going to export this Kickstarter, for example, the whole thing, and we're just going to go export. You're going to save it, as a JSON file. We can just do whatever one, that's fine by me. Export it, and we're going to export it to Kickstarter, and then we can just go save. And now if we open up our VS Code, it's got a nice little directory of what's going on inside of Postman as a JSON file. You don't need to read and change this, although you could, and it would work fine in Postman, but Postman's honestly just the easier way to do that. And now you can add this to the Git and run it, and if someone wants to go in, they can just come in here. Let's close that. Let's import, and if we want to upload a file, we want to upload it from the same file we just saved. And yep, and then we can import as a copy just because the same name already exists. And boom, all the same things that we have. And you notice inside of this copy as well, we've also got the variables that we set up inside of here. Because these variables, when I added them, were added as a collection level variable. So you can have different variables as a scope, global scope, so your whole project, or I usually just use collection variables, so the top level sort of thing up here, because it gets used across here. So that token, for example, gets used inside of users, but also projects, so it just makes sense to me at least to put it inside the collection level up here. It's just one of those, be aware of when you are exporting, that you are exporting and therefore saving to not only your teammates, but or someone you just want to have a look at the code, but you're also usually pushing that up to GitHub, all those variables, and they might have some sort of secrets in them. So you just want to double check that. But now, if I run this, that's already saved, getting cluttered, and we run git add, and let's go added Postman. Postman, let's call it collection. And looks like it ran successfully, nothing's blue anymore. So we want to just do a git push. Git push, git push. Cool. And now we've got it set up, so if anyone wants to come in and work on this project as a team member, they can, and they have a consistent sort of file to read through. They're not going through exports or imports or function names or anything else like that we set up. It's going to run a bunch of stuff for us with this Prettier that will just help make not only our life easier, but it will just enforce and sort of fix the errors on save that ESlint will pick up. So like ESlint will, and again, we've gone through this, ESlint will pick up stuff like that semicolon when it runs the linter, but if you just run save, like I'm pressing Control S auto save, it will fix that before it even needs to run the linter to fix it. So it just makes our life a hell of a lot easier. And if you have it as this, it means that everyone sort of has the same settings. So one of the things that first started really annoying me and my teammates when I joined this new workplace was they were all using double quotes, and I think they had like 120 or something for the print width. I don't know, it was a silly sort of long print width. They didn't really care about it. And I think they were also using tabs instead of spaces. So like every time I even looked at a file and I pressed a single button, my Prettier would run and completely rearrange the entire file. And then like I'd commit it because it looks all pretty to me, it looks all nice. And then they go and run when you commit and you sort of comparing what changes are being made. You're like, I can't even tell what you did because the whole file's changed and it's not anything has actually changed. It's just the format and like spaces and double quotes and stuff. So because of that, it was really hard to sort of tell what changes were made, and if you run like git blends, git blame, like who made this mistake or who made this function, it was all me because I just reformatted the file and saved, and I was like, can we just have a consistent sort of way, and this is how it sort of is. This will be very consistent. Again, it will be very helpful for particularly teammates, pretty much. Again, we're enforcing it with Husky, and then we have our little Kickstarter Postman export, again, just to help. So let me know if this was helpful to you guys or not. It was, again, one of those sort of extra add-ons, but not potentially vital if you're just starting out. Anyway, if you made it this far along, please go the extra mile. Leave me a like and subscribe, and hit the bell notification to be notified whenever there's a new update. Thank you guys, and I'll see you next time.